Testing, test. Perfect. Okay, I think. Hello. Good morning. Testing, test. Yeah, okay. Okay. Good morning. Before we begin, I just want to put everyone on notice for next week. The kids have vacation. The plan is that I'm going to be here, and therefore we should have class. But things can change, and I will have to let you know.
That's why there's Texas.
Exactly. Yes.
How do we exist without those in the past? I don't know.
Well, yesterday I called you.
Yeah, he actually got a phone call. Well, it was too many words to try to put into a text. It would have been.
No, that wasn't the reason. I thought about texting you earlier, but I wanted to gauge also your comfort. In other words,
Yeah.
it wasn't just a blanket question. I wanted to see.
Right. But
It's.
he wasn't
I
bad.
enjoy more talking on the phone,
Yeah.
but I'm more likely to actually text than call. So sometimes I text and I know I'm not going to make the phone call. It's either the kids are around or it's just too hectic. Okay. So we're in the middle of chapter 29. I have here
393.
393. Yeah? Is that what we're holding at the bottom of 393?
Yeah, we're holding it.
Okay.
Yeah, we just finished the top of that page.
Yeah. So we were talking about making a cheshbon hanefesh, right? To be a master of accounts. And what are we supposed to, what accounts are we supposed to master? What are we supposed to take stock of? So first, Alter Rebbe said those the sins of your youth, and even someone who doesn't have sins of youth should be a master of accounts to figure out everything they thought, spoke, and did from the day they were born or from the day they remember. Were they all holy or not? Remember, holy means godly. Were they all godly or not? And if they're not godly, they don't necessarily have to be bad. But if they're not godly, then they're not. Then they're not. And therefore, and because they're not godly, therefore you can become sort of a vehicle for the animal soul. And if you're a vehicle for the animal soul, now you have what to beat yourself up about. That you are a piece of your animal soul. And because remember, we're trying to break the person down to the point that the love of God will, like the fire, will catch on to all parts of his body. But if he's too thick, if you're too thick of a log, you got to break it into little pieces. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to break the person into little pieces, yeah? Let's say a person is actually a Beinoni. In other words, he has managed to control his thought, speech, and action. And not only he controls his thought, speech, and action from here on out, but he managed to do tshuva, and there's nothing to look back at and say, there's something negative here. So the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that there's still one place you can look to find a little garbage that you could use to break the person with. And that is dreams. Okay, so where exactly do dreams come from, and what is there anything to them? Is there substance to them? So we learned a little bit about dreams in JLI course last year. But if we go to the prophets, on the one hand, the prophet says, Chalomot shav yidaberun, means dreams speak falsehoods. In other words, dreams are nothing. Yeah? And when it comes to halacha, dreams mean nothing. So remember, I don't know if you remember in the JLI, I'm almost positive we brought this in the class, that if there's, for example, there was someone, his father died, and his father came to him in his dream, and he told him that if you go, I hid some money in this place, but that money is really the second tithe money. Second tithe money is money that basically fruits that you have to take to Jerusalem. So every year, the 6 years of crops that you have, right? Because the 7th year sabbatical, 6 years of crops. So year number 1, 2, 4, and 5, the first tithe goes to the Levi, the second tithe goes to the poor people. However, on year number 3 and 6, the first tithe also goes to the Levi, but the second tithe is called the second tithe, and it goes to the owners. You get to keep it, but you have to eat it in Jerusalem. The problem is when you have if you have a big field, a lot of crops, it could be quite costly to schlep that much stuff to Jerusalem. And if it's perishable and you're not going to Jerusalem for a while, it might not be edible by the time you get there. So what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to sell the produce, and then the money becomes holy, has the sanctity of the second tithe, and you take the money with you to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, you buy food with that money, and that food that you buy with that money has to be eaten in Jerusalem. Okay? So this guy has a dream. His father comes to him in his dream, and he tells him, if you go to the third tree from the left in the backyard, I buried there 1,000 gold coins, but you should know those 1,000 gold coins are second tithe money. You can't just use them to buy a house or to buy an iPhone. You have to take that money to Jerusalem, buy food there, and eat it there. So he wakes up in the morning. He goes to the backyard. He finds the tree his father showed him. He digs and he finds 1,000 gold coins there. Now the question is, does he have to take these coins to Jerusalem, or can he just use them? Because obviously the dream meant something, right? So the rabbi said, no, you can use them for whatever you want, because dreams are meaningless. Wait, dreams are meaningless, and yet he found 1,000 gold coins where the dream said, right?
I say pretty accurate dream.
But halacha doesn't give any stock to dreams, and therefore if you have a dream, even if there's some sort of halachic ramification to the dream, you don't have to take heed to it. However, the Zohar says this is only for regular, ordinary people. Because we know that when, I think it's in the Torah, right? Where God speaks to Aaron and Miriam when they spoke about Moses, and God spoke to Aaron, right? Aaron and Miriam, and he said that prophets I speak to with a dream or in a vision, but to Moses I speak face to face, mouth to mouth. Yeah, so he's in a different league. In other words, how does prophecy come? How could prophecy come? Through dreams. So dreams are something. Not only that, we know there are great Kabbalists and great rabbis that would ask what's called a shilas cholom, a dream request. They would write a question on a piece of parchment, they'd put it under their pillow, they'd go to sleep, and in a dream they would be revealed the answer. There was actually a book from 700-800 years ago from the authors of the Tosfos. One of the authors of the Tosfos, it's called Questions and Answers from Heaven. And there are things that we do today, halachic rulings that we follow today, that are answers to some of these questions that were asked in dreams. So apparently there is duality. There's a paradox here, but the answer to this paradox is that it depends on the person who dreamed. Yeah. In other words, this was the gist of the explanation we gave in the course, was that if you're a person that's in control of your thoughts during the day, then the dreams are a product of your controlled thoughts. And therefore, what's in your dream is part and parcel with your thoughts during the day. In other words, it's sort of under your control, sort of part of your conscious. However, the average person, our mind flies all over the place. And therefore, and we're not in control of our thoughts. Therefore, what we dream about at night might be real, but more likely it's just a byproduct of some of the thoughts we had during the day. Some thoughts that we may not even really be aware of those thoughts that we had. In one place, the Alter Rebbe describes it or compares it almost to food digestion. What happens when you eat food? So your body takes apart the food, it keeps the good stuff, and it throws out the waste. The Alter Rebbe says that's what dreams are. Dreams are, you go to sleep, your neshama goes up, it digests all the thoughts you had during the day, it keeps the good stuff, and the bad stuff it gets rid of. How does it get rid of the unimportant or insignificant thoughts? It spits them out in the dreams. So the dreams are the byproduct of the good thoughts we had during the day. The point is that If you want to know if you're really pure, start to take stock of your dreams. In other words, if your dreams are pure, are godly, then you know that you're most probably a tzaddik, right? Because remember, the Beinoni controls his thoughts, but he can only control his thoughts in step 2. In other words, once the thought comes into my head, the Beinoni controls whether to think about it consciously or not. But the Beinoni can still have negative thoughts that come into his mind that he gets rid of. And those will be represented in negative dreams. Because the dreams, remember, is trying to get rid of all of those non-important thoughts. Yeah. So the Beinoni is in control of his conscious thoughts. He's not in control of his subconscious thoughts. That's why every once in a while the Beinoni can be thrown a curveball. The Beinoni knows how to hit the curveball out of the park, right? The Beinoni knows how to take the curveball and get rid of it, but the curveballs still come. And therefore, if you want to know if you're really in control or not, think about your dreams. So remember, the first person is the person who actually sinned. A person that actually sins, it's not that difficult to break him down because all you have to do is he has to remind himself of all the sins he committed, and he knows he has what to beat himself up with. What about someone who didn't actually commit sins? Then you think about the thought, speech, and actions that aren't sinful, but they're not godly. That's also, what about someone who even his thought, speech, and action is godly? So the Rebbe says, look, take stock of your dreams. If your dreams are godly, then you actually have nothing to beat yourself up with. But if your dreams aren't godly, now you know that subconsciously there's stuff going on there. Yeah? So let's continue and look now on the bottom of page 393. This is the 15 Adar 1. Let him further consider his dreams in order to humble his spirit. For one may learn more about himself from his dreams than from his waking conscious thoughts. For the most part, they are vanity and an affliction of the spirit, because his soul does not ascend heavenward during his sleep. Since it is written, who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? Meaning, in our context, whose soul shall rise heavenward while he sleeps to see and absorb matters of Torah and holiness, which will in turn be reflected in his dreams? In other words, who's going to have Torah dreams? So the next verse gives the answer. He that has clean hands and a pure heart, implying that the soul of one whose hands and heart are not pure does not ascend. And that is why his dreams are a patchwork of vanity and foolishness. In other words, our soul goes up to heaven to be rejuvenated. That's no question. The question is, does the conscious part of our soul also go up heavenward? In other words, what we see and feel during our sleep, is that also heavenly? So that depends. The verse says, if you have a clean hands and a pure heart. Now, clean hands, that's the Beinoni has clean hands, right? Whatever he chooses to do, think, or speak, that's clean. The question is, does he have a pure heart? In other words, do the subconscious thoughts that come to his heart are they also pure? And if not, then his dreams aren't heavenly, and therefore his dreams are full of vanity, a patchwork of vanity and foolishness. Furthermore, this is in Aramaic. Furthermore, those originating from the evil side come and attach themselves to him and inform him in his dreams of mundane affairs, and sometimes mock him and show him false things and torment him in his dreams, and so on. As stated in the Zohar on Vayikra. See it there discussed at length. In other words, the person whose soul does not ascend to heaven and doesn't have heavenly dreams, his soul can have foolish dreams, even scary dreams. Why? Because he's being taunted in his dreams, tormented in his dreams. Again, why? Because they're coming from his evil side. The Alter Rebbe here is for the first time, Alter Rebbe never really compared the animal soul to the evil to the evil inclination. Here, the Alter Rebbe seems to be connecting the animal soul to the evil inclination, right? Because what's at play here? At play here is the animal soul, because the Beinoni still possesses the animal soul. It still exists. True, he masters it, but it still exists. And it's the animal soul that's giving him these evil dreams that might flood his head during his sleep. Okay, so this is the stock that he has to take. By the Talmud has a number of stories where Roman emperors or generals ask the rabbis, "Oh, you're so smart. Tell me what I'm going to dream about tonight." And there's a few cases in the Talmud. One place the Talmud told the emperor that he's going to dream about that he's going to be captured by the Syrians, and he's going to have to cut wheat with golden sickle or something. I don't know, like some odd dream, but it's tormenting for a Caesar for an emperor to have to dream about being a captive of war and using golden stuff to do labor work. And that's what they dreamed about that night, because when it's like, don't think about a pink elephant, right? When you scared the emperor into thinking this, he's going to think about it even subconsciously during the day, and then at night he's obviously going to dream about it. So this was the way the rabbis, they obviously didn't know what he would dream about. They created what he would dream about, right? By giving him some thought that would obviously preoccupy his mind during the day. Now, if a person actually takes stock and comes to the conclusion that he's still got a very active, vibrant animal soul, and therefore he is not worthy of being the tzaddik he wants to be, or being the tzaddik he thinks he is, then it's very simple. It'll be a very simple process to break down his ego a bit, and the fire of the passionate love of God will overtake him and will catch on to him, to his whole being.
If it's tzaddik, only dreams about godly things.
Yeah.
Does that mean that his dreams are not coming from the animal soul, but from the godly soul? Or
because
he still has an animal soul.
No, the animal soul that a tzaddik has is not an animal soul anymore. In other words, it's the soul that gives him life, but it's not animalistic. In other words, what makes an animal soul an animal soul? Not that it gives you life. That's not animalistic in nature. What makes an animal soul is that it's selfish in nature. The tzaddik, the Beinani, can only subdue his animal soul. The tzaddik can convert his animal soul into a second godly soul. So remember, we had the example of that the animal soul and the godly soul are two drivers in the car. Yeah. So we all know, those of us who drive for a living, how annoying sometimes a backseat driver can be. But the reason that it's annoying is because the backseat driver doesn't actually have a steering wheel and a speed, a pedal. So we feel that they're just encroaching on our turf. But imagine for a second that you had two steering wheels, two gas pedals, and two brake pedals, and each one worked independent. Then the backseat driver wouldn't be annoying. The backseat driver would be a competitor. Now imagine that they're not side by side, but they're back to back. I saw once, there's a video of someone, there's a parking lot where you're not allowed to back into the parking spots. You have to pull in forward. You're not allowed to back into the parking spot. So this person reversed his car. In other words, he kept the front part of the car, but he also turned the back part of the car into a driving part. And he pulled in and got the parking guy totally confused of how he was parking. But imagine you had a car with two viable steering wheels and gas pedals and brake pedals on either side. This is the person. We have a godly soul and an animal soul. They're each vying for rulership over our body. They can each pull the body in opposite directions. Yeah. The Beinani really can only try as much as possible to give the animal soul sleeping pills. That's really the most the Beinani can do. The tzaddik can actually convert the Beinani. It can convert his animal soul. In other words, the tzaddik can put up enough mirrors for the animal soul that when the animal soul drives, it puts its gear on reverse when you're trying to drive forward. And through the mirrors, it can tell which direction you're going, and it can help you steer in the right direction. In other words, it becomes almost a second godly soul. But only the tzaddik can accomplish that. Remember, we had the two words iskafia and ishapcha, which is subduing and conversion. The tzaddik converts his animal soul. The Beinoni can only subdue his animal soul.
Does the tzaddik, when a Beinoni, your soul's still going to go up every night, and you're going to get back in the morning.
Yeah.
What happens with the tzaddik? Same thing.
Same thing. But the tzaddik's soul goes up completely. So when the tzaddik dreams, in other words, when we dream, our soul is dreaming. It's not our body that's dreaming. Our body's sleeping, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our soul is dreaming. Now, if our soul goes up to heaven, doesn't that imply that our dreams are heavenly? And the answer is no. That's what the verse says. The only one who ascends to heaven completely is the one who has a clean hands and a pure heart. And that's a tzaddik. Because we don't have clean hands and a pure heart, so our soul does ascend to heaven somewhat to be rejuvenated for the next day, but not completely. And therefore, part of its consciousness stays in the person, stays down here, and therefore its dreams are flooded from the animal soul that's still in the person, that's still down here. In other words, from the soul that's in this world, it's not being influenced by the heavens. So its dreams aren't heavenly, aren't godly. The tzaddik's dreams are, because the tzaddik's soul is completely up there when it's sleeping.
So just like we really don't have prophets today, we don't have tzaddiks today.
Why not?
Well, can you name any tzaddiks?
It's
No. I mean, it was easy in the past to say Moses was a tzaddik, all these people were tzaddiks, and the Rebbe a tzaddik. But since then, who in modern times is a tzaddik?
There are many people that live very, very pure, kosher lives, and that could be in the realm of tzaddik. Now, we did learn in the beginning of Tanya that there are two levels of tzaddikim. There are complete tzaddikim and incomplete tzaddikim. In other words, tzaddikim that have completely converted their animal soul, and tzaddikim that are incomplete. And in incomplete tzaddikim, there are thousands of levels, just like with a Rasha, there's thousands of levels, right? There's a Rasha that's a murderer, and there's a Rasha that's he sins every once in a while, or someone that doesn't even control his thought, speech, and act. His thoughts and speech is also a Rasha, not a Beinoni, right? So there's could be billions of levels in between. So also with tzaddikim, so we know that there could be a tremendous amount of incomplete tzaddikim at a given time, but for complete tzaddikim, there are only singles in a generation. That's what we said. Tzaddik yisod olam. One tzaddik can be the foundation of a world, and it's impossible for you to know who a tzaddik is, because even the tzaddik himself may not know if he's a tzaddik, right? Because the tzaddik is constantly on guard. Maybe he's not a tzaddik. Like Rabbah said, right? He said he's a Beinoni even though he was a tzaddik, because although he never had any sinful thoughts, he didn't know. Maybe if he puts his guard down for 1 second, he will have sinful thoughts. Okay? So it's really impossible for anyone to know who a tzaddik is unless the person lives a very public life and and even if a person lives a very publicly tzaddik life, you don't know what's going on in his thoughts when he's alone in his room. So it's not our business we know God, the world has to have tzaddikim. We know there are tzaddikim in the world. Who they are is irrelevant. So it says there are 36 hidden tzaddikim in the world. Yeah, I don't know. In other places, it makes it sound like there can be many more. Okay. At least 36. But in Tanya, in chapter 1, we had that there could even be a single tzaddik as the foundation of the world. So are those 36 tzaddikim, are they complete tzaddikim, incomplete tzaddikim? I don't know. I'm not sure. One thing you know for sure is that if you see a moving machine, you know there's electricity in there. You may not know if it's batteries or gas or diesel or solar power. You don't know, but you know there's electricity in there. If the world exists, it means there are tzaddikim. Who those tzaddikim are and in what form they come, that we don't know. And by the way, a tzaddik doesn't have to be a man. It could be a woman. It could be a child. It could be an old person in a nursing home. Yeah, a person in a nursing home that may not be able to do a lot of mitzvah, a lot of things, can be a tzaddik because they do whatever they can do. They may not be able to do much, but they've done tshuva on all their previous life. Right now, they're in the level of a tzaddik. We don't know how a tzaddik can manifest himself in person. Okay, so now, Alter Rebbe is interestingly, he's going to use some pretty harsh words here. Let's see how we go. The longer he reflects on these the bottom of 394. The longer he reflects on these matters, both in his own thoughts and by delving deeply into books which speak of these matters, in order to break down his heart within him and render himself shamed and despised in his own eyes, as is written in the scriptures, so utterly despised that he despises his very life. The more because remember, what's his very life? His animal soul. Yeah. The more he despises and degrades, thereby the sitra achara. Remember the other side, casting it down to the ground and humbling it from its haughtiness and pride and self-exaltation, wherewith it exalts itself over the light of the divine soul's holiness, obscuring its radiance. When it makes itself big, it sort of overshadows the light of the godly soul. But if you manage to break down its ego, you pop the bubble a little, so it diminishes in size. Now the light of the godly soul can shine and disperse further and further. This is what the stock taking should accomplish. But then Alter Rebbe continues. He should also thunder against it. In other words, against his animal soul, the sitra achra, with a strong and raging voice, in order to humble it. As our sages state, a person should always rouse the good impulse against the evil impulse. As it is written, rage and sin not. What should he rage? This means that one should rage in his mind against the animal soul, which is his evil impulse, with a voice of stormy indignation, saying to it, indeed, you are truly evil and wicked, abominable, loathsome, and disgraceful, and so forth, using all the epithets by which our sages have called it. And continue, how long will you obscure the light of the blessed Ein Sof, which pervades all the worlds, which was, is, and will be the same, even in the very place where I stand? Just as the light of the blessed Ein Sof was alone before the world was created, utterly unchanged, as it is written, I, the Lord, have not changed. In other words, the fact of creation has wrought no change in him, for he transcends time and so on, and therefore the fact that it is now after creation cannot affect him. But you, repulsive one, and so forth, deny the truth which is so plainly visible, that all is truly as nothing in his presence, a truth which is so apparent as to be visible to the eye. So Alter Rebbe, it goes pretty harsh on the person. Alter Rebbe is telling us how we should speak to ourselves, how we should try to tame our ego. And Alter Rebbe says you can see this literally with your physical, visible to the eye. It just goes to show the gap between the Alter Rebbe and us, that Alter Rebbe sees godliness and has to be told about the world, where by us it's just the opposite. And yet, through learning Tanya, the Alter Rebbe expects that we can sort of get to that place, that godliness can become not just second nature, but a more obvious nature than the world. Before the Alter Rebbe passed away, in the Shabbos before he passed away, he asked his son, he felt that he was dying, he became very ill then, he was running away from Napoleon, and it was during the war, and it was in the winter, and he became very ill, and he felt his strength leaving him, and he asked his son, what he pointed to the beam holding up the building, and he asked him, what do you see there? So he said, I see a beam. So Alter Rebbe said he doesn't see a beam, he sees the word of God that sustains the beam. In other words, his vision of materialism was fading. And that was sort of the sign to him that his time in this world was coming up. But even before that, even though he was able to see the material beam, but the material beam wasn't as obvious to him as the spark of God that's creating the material beam. It's almost like when you take Tylenol and you're having a splitting headache or a burning fever, when you take Tylenol, of course you hold the pill and you see the pill, but what do you see when you see the pill? You see that in a half hour, I'm going to sweat and my fever is going to go down a bit. You see that hopefully in 45 minutes, my headache will go down. Yeah. So sure, you see the pill, but you're not really looking at the pill. You don't really care about the pill. You're not even paying attention to the pill. What you see in the pill is the reduction in your headache. Why?
Effects.
Why?
Effects it's gonna get.
Why? Because you know this from experience. It's so obvious to you, and that's why you're taking it. But it's not just. It's more than hope. You already see it because you know it works. You know it's worked in the past. When it doesn't always work, then it's hope. Then it's not vision, right? Then it's hope. Oh, so then maybe it is hope because you're not sure is it going to work or not. But if it's a regular
But you
fever or
still take it. Yeah.
fine. But if it's a regular fever or regular headache that it usually works for, it's not hope anymore. You see healing when you look at the pill. When you're very, very thirsty and you're driving, you don't have any water, and you come home and you finally see a bottle of water, you don't really see the water. What you see is you see it in your mind. You already see the dryness of your mouth going down. Okay. When we look at the world, the first thing we see is the physicality. Yeah, if we think about it, we know that if we look deeply, we'll see the spark of God. Just like when you're not so thirsty and you're drinking the water, why are you drinking the water? Because you know it'll prevent thirst. So right now, I see the water. I drink the water. Do you know that when you drink water and you're not thirsty, you don't make a blessing? According to halacha, because there's no taste. Water has no taste. So if you're drinking it to quench your thirst, so then you're enjoying the water. But if you're just drinking water and you're not thirsty, then technically you're not enjoying it. Okay. But I always make a blessing on water because even if I'm drinking to prevent thirst, because at the end of the day, are you really sure you're not thirsty now and you're not actually satisfying some? I don't know. It's too complicating for me to differentiate. But according to halacha, that's the halacha. So therefore, by the way, if you take a sip of water to swallow a pill, you don't make a bracha either. Because you don't make a blessing on medicine, you're not enjoying the medication. And you're only drinking the water in order to swallow the pill, so you don't make a bracha on that either. So the Alter Rebbe is expecting of us that we reach such a level that our animal soul isn't disguising anymore, isn't concealing the godliness around us. And therefore, when you look around, what are you going to see? You're going to see godliness. There was a chassid that when we say the confessional, we bang on our chest. So a chassid said, really, we should be using a metal bar, because when the evil inclination feels us go like this, it thinks we're patting it on its back. But these are the words that Alter Rebbe is telling us to use, to literally use like a crowbar to bash our evil, our animal soul, our evil inclination by telling it you're distorting reality. When I look at my child, I don't see the physical child. I don't see the features of his face, if he's beautiful, if he's not. I see my child. I see the soul. I see what's beneath it. That's the way I should look at everything in the world. I should see the soul of it all. I should see the purpose of its creation. I should see the godly spark that's there. Of course, you see the material, but that's not what catches your attention. And yet, that's the way we are, because our animal soul is sort of tints our vision. And we have to be upset at the animal soul for doing this to us. We have to try to push it out of the way. How do you push it out of the way? By deflating its ego. Because when it's egoistic, so it blows itself up into a balloon, and then it blocks the view, right? We all know if someone blows up a big balloon, it's going to block your view. If a balloon's blocking your view, what do? Just pop it. Yeah. So we have to pop the inflammation of our animal soul so that our godly soul can have a clearer vision of reality. So Alter Rebbe really gives us two elements over here. There's stock taking, and then there is a verbal abuse, verbally abusing. I don't know that's not a good term to use, but we're talking about verbally abusing yourself. Again, not in a destructive way. We're trying to destroy the animal soul. We're not trying to destroy ourselves that we give up. We're trying to destroy the part of us that's concealing and stopping us from advancing. The question is, how can you do that if we said at the beginning of the chapter that who is the person? What's part of this meditation? The meditation is, I am my animal soul. And therefore, who do you think you are? Who do I think I am? I think I'm a tzaddik. Who do I think I am? I'm an animal soul. So if I'm the animal soul, how could I beat up my animal soul? If I'm the animal soul. So it would seem obvious that before you make this stock taking, before you realize exactly where you're holding, so then it's really impossible because you can't differentiate who's talking. What do you feel? Are you feeling godly? Are you feeling the animalistic part? So what are you talking to? But now that you've taken stock of all your thoughts, speech, and actions, now you know who's talking at what point. Now you know if I'm feeling this way, this is my animal soul feeling this way. If I'm feeling this way, it's my godly soul. So now I could sort of set it aside and use my godly soul to scream at my animal soul. So even though I myself may identify more hours of the day as my animal soul, but I could still choose to sort of switch sides for a moment and use my godly soul to admonish and strike at the animal soul. Before we move on, we said to take stock. There are different times of doing this, right? We spoke about it in the past. Some people do it every night when we say the bedtime Shema. There's a confessional we say then. Some people do it once a week, like a Thursday night before Shabbos. They want to come to Shabbos pure. Some people do it on the eve of Rosh Chodesh. It's called a mini Yom Kippur. So you'll do it then. They'll say an extra confessional. You say the Al Chait. By the way, in the Siddur it says you could say the Al Chait during the bedtime Shema. You know, the Al Chait we say on Yom Kippur, the longer confessional. Some people say it then because that's part of the vidui, part of confessional you say before you die, and we don't know when we go to sleep at night if this is our last chance. So some people will do it every night. It's a little strenuous to do it every night, to put yourself into that position every night, to think this is my last night. Might be a little too much for the average person. It might drag us down. We might not be able to focus properly during the day, so we do it once a week, once a month. But specifically once a year during the month of Elul, when we prepare for the high holidays, it's a special time to take stock of the whole year. So the story is that the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, his son, he was known as the Mittel Rebbe, the middle Rebbe. Why? He was probably given that name after his passing during the third Rebbe's times. So there's the old Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe is the older Rebbe, then there's the middle Rebbe, and then there's the current Rebbe. And those names stuck. But the Rebbes, the later Rebbes, they would refer to the Rebbe as the Alter Rebbe, and they would refer to the previous Rebbe as my father the Rebbe, or my grandfather the Rebbe, or my great-grandfather the Rebbe. The Rebbe would refer to the previous Rebbe as he would always say, my father-in-law the Rebbe. But when they would say the Rebbe, it was always referring to the Alter Rebbe. But so his son was a child and he was learning in school. And school then was, in the teacher's home. You went to the teacher's home and that's where the teacher taught you. So the teacher would teach class and then the students would review. So the teacher went out into his porch, onto his balcony to get some fresh air. And next door lived the town doctor. And this is during the month of Elul, which is usually late August, September. And in Russia, this is, basically the waters are going to freeze up in a bit. And one of the things they would use for medicinal purposes were leeches, right? To draw blood. That was a very common a medical, medicinal thing, was to draw blood, right? So he overhears the doctor talking to the teacher outside, and the doctor tells the teacher it's already deep into Elul, and I still don't have all my leeches that I need for the year. After school, the Mittel Rebbe goes home, and he comes into his father, into the Rebbe's courtyard, and he sees a whole bunch of Chassidim standing and talking, and they're just having, they're talking. It didn't look like a deep Torah conversation. So he walks past them, and he looks at them, and he says, it's already deep in Elul, and you haven't collected all the leeches yet. So they assumed he was, playing with them. They assumed that this is like some deep message here that came from the Alter Rebbe. So they asked him what he meant. So he explained to them that, Elul is the time of stock taking, the time of separating the good from the bad, right? The bad blood from the good blood. You guys standing around there as if it's, as if it's rest period time. Get to work. It's already deep in Elul. And again, they're assuming this is coming from the Alter Rebbe, and they took this to heart and they started working on themselves, and somehow it got back to the Alter Rebbe, this sort of Torah about leeches, and it was quoted to the Alter Rebbe in his name. but it was quoted to him as coming from his son, the Mittel Rebbe. And he realized what happened, that I guess either he asked his son where he got this from or what happened. And he said, this is what the Baal Shem Tov taught us. Baal Shem Tov taught us that everything we hear and see in life should serve as a lesson in our service of God. So the Mittel Rebbe heard the doctor speaking about leeches. He wasn't talking about godly service. He was talking about his business, about his practice. And the Mittel Rebbe used this as a teaching in serving God. The Rebbe said, we all had to work on ourselves to get to this point. And by our children, it's second. They're born with it, right? Because Mittel Rebbe was a little kid. And he's already incorporating this idea into his life that the older generation, they were sort of converted Hasidim. They had to adopt this mindset. They weren't born with it. And the children, they're born into this. It's like the child born on the top of the mountain, right? The guy who climbs Mount Everest and he gets to the top after many failed attempts and he sees a little child roaming around. So he asks the child, what are you doing here? How did you get here? She's like, I was born here. Anyhow, okay. So what do we have? We have that the Alter Rebbe wants us to remember, if the fiery, burning, passionate love to God isn't totally consuming us, then we're like the log that's sort of too big, too thick to catch on to fire, and we need to break it apart. Now, today gives us the tools how to break us down, how to break it apart. Last week we learned this, or 2 weeks ago, we had a song, right? Es and Esrich, remember the song about eating and drinking, and so there's another song that the Rebbe taught. The custom was that on Simchas Torah, so Simchas Torah is that there are 2 nights, there's Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah. So Shmini Atzeret by day, the Hasidim would go all over New York to other shuls to liven up the spirits. It started during the war in the 40s. The previous Rebbe did this right after the war, sent out his students to other shuls. And I once met a Jew who wasn't a survivor, but he grew up during that time period. I was a kid, so going back 25 years probably, and I was with a yeshiva student. It's called tahalucha. You'd go like on a march. We'd go to a shul, 45 minutes away, an hour away, an hour and a half away, to dance with them. You've been to a Hasidic hakafos. It's very different than the average shul. The average shul, they walk around, the dance around the bima a little, you sing a little song. By Hasidim, we know how to say l'chaim and liven the place up. So we did this, and an elderly Jew came over to us and asked us, he said, do you know why your Rebbe sends you out every Yom Tov to go to other shuls? And we're looking at him, this clean shave, modern Orthodox, tell me why my Rebbe, tell us. So he said he grew up in the 40s, and he remembers in the years after the war, and this wasn't just 46, 40, it was for a number of years after the war, when it came time for Hakafos, so it was very difficult for people to get up and dance. And he remembers as a kid, after Ma'ariv, after the evening service, all the adults sat down and started crying before Hakafos. Everyone had lost some relatives. And even those who didn't, they at that point, they all knew of the destruction that happened, and it was very devastating. And everyone was sitting and crying, and no one was able to get up and change the mode. And then the doors burst open, and a group of Hasidic yeshiva students come and dancing in, and in 1 second, everyone was on their feet dancing. They needed someone to pull them out. So he goes, this is why your Rebbe did this. Anyhow, so on Shmini Atzeres by night, many shuls, they don't have hakafos. We do. In Hasidic communities, we do. But on the next day, so in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, everyone would go out, spread out to the shuls all over the New York City. To 9:30 at night, the Rebbe would hold a Hasidic gathering, a farbrengen. But there was almost no one there. And no one dared show their face there because the Rebbe wanted you to go out to other shuls. You're not supposed to be there. So who was there? Probably 100, 150 of the older people that couldn't walk, couldn't go far. And then, you had a yeshiva student that broke his leg, was on crutches and couldn't go, so he was there. But it was literally, but then the smart people went to the closer shul, so they were able to come back, within 20 minutes, a half hour, they were able to be back ready. The people who went further didn't come back till 12:30, 11, 12 o'clock at night, because they went to really far places, a 3-hour walk. Hakafos finishes 9 o'clock, and by the time you come back, it's 12 o'clock. So the Rebbe would, the way it worked was the Rebbe would verbring, and when it came, like 11:30, the Rebbe would start asking those in charge, did everyone come back yet? And when the answer came that all the groups came back, then the verbringen would finish. The Rebbe would leave for about 45 minutes, so they had time to change the shul from a verbringen setting where people are sitting down at tables to a hakafos setting where there's no tables because there's no room for sitting. And then the Rebbe would come in for hakafos. Usually it was around 12:40. No, it was usually around 12 o'clock is when everyone came back. And so hakafos would start 12:30, 12:45 in the morning. And it would go for 3-4 hours on a regular year. In the later years, they stopped selling the verses during, they would do it beforehand. So it took an hour and a half, 2 hours. But in the 50s, in the 60s, it would take, till they wouldn't finish till 3-4 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. But the Rebbe hadn't eaten the holiday, no one had eaten the meal yet, the holiday meal, right? Because the Farbrengen, you came back from the shul, you went straight to the Farbrengen, and then you changed the shul to Hakafos, so you had to make Kiddush and eat the festive meal 4 o'clock in the morning. So the Rebbe would go upstairs to his father-in-law's apartment. That's where the Rebbe would eat the festival meals. And so the meal took about an hour and a half. The Rebbe would come down about 5:30 in the morning, and the Rebbe would teach a Hasidic melody, a Hasidic song. And the Rebbe would first say something about the song, either a story behind it or its message, and then the Rebbe would teach it a few times till those capable people would learn it. They would sing it, and the Rebbe would correct them, and once the Rebbe felt that they knew it, the Rebbe would leave, and then 10 o'clock was the morning service, and it was back. They were back at it. There are a number of fascinating songs. One of them is a song in Ukrainian, like Ukrainian Russian. And the song is a song that peasants would sing. The Ukrainian peasants would sing it. And it's a song about how a guy lost his job because he drank too much. He lost his horse. And because he lost his horse and he was drunk, he lost his job. And he's bemoaning the fact, sort of, that, I want to drink, but I also have to realize that in the morning I'm going to have to give an accounting of what happened the day before. So the Rebbe said that the Hasidim heard this song from the peasants and they adopted it in their divine service. They would sing the song and they would use it as a metaphor that the Rebbe taught us on Simchas Torah that, we've come through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we're already after the whole festival month. And where are we? What have we accomplished? We've lost we tried working, but have we really done the service that God wanted us? So we drink, we say l'chaim, but we keep in mind that we have to give an accounting. And the l'chaim helps us to quiet down the musings of our animal soul that are trying to dissuade us and put us down and say, nah, you didn't work, you didn't do anything, you're a failure. We try to quiet that down so we could focus on the accounting we have to give to God. In this, anyhow, so it's a Ukrainian song. We sing it, and anyhow, so I thought it very well connected to the subject at hand. Okay, so now. Let's at least finish these few paragraphs, because I want to continue, but we're not going to be able to. Anyway. In this way, he will help. So this is the third to last paragraph from page 396. In this way, he will. In other words, by doing this accounting and by beating up verbally his animal soul, he will help his divine soul, enlightening its eyes to perceive the truth of the unity of the infinite light of the Ein Sof, as though with physical sight and not merely through the lesser perception of hearing and understanding. For as explained elsewhere, this is the core of the whole divine service. In other words, and maybe we'll go over again next week, there's a difference between seeing and hearing. What's the difference between seeing and hearing? Obviously, we know there's a difference in the senses, but what's the difference in seeing and hearing? When you use seeing and hearing in relation to understanding, what's the difference? No, sometimes you'll say, I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you say, I see what you're saying. What's the difference?
They use that in the Ray, isn't it? I see.
Yeah.
Or sometimes when you're hearing, you can hear something in the background and not really be listening, and absorbing it. Sometimes when you're seeing it, like you were saying, if you see your children, you don't just see the physical appearance, you see through them, and you see the love and everything.
Okay.
So it's a different experience.
Different experience. In a sense, hearing, oh, very good. No pun intended. Hearing is not absolute. You're not absolutely convinced by what you hear. So if you hear the sound of an airplane, you're convinced that's the sound you hear. And then someone shows you proof that there was no airplane anywhere around when you heard that sound, but there was a natural thunder that happened that made it really sound like an airplane. You'll believe him, even though you were convinced you heard an airplane because of what you heard. But you'll believe him because, it makes sense, and you only heard it. But if you saw an airplane, and then someone brings you radar data, any type of data they want to prove there was no airplane in this area during the time you saw it, are you going to believe them? No. Why? Because you saw it. And when you see something, that's more real than hearing it. In other words, when you hear something, sure, no one's going to be able to convince you didn't hear anything, but they'll be able to convince you what you heard, and it might be different than what you thought you heard. So when you say, and you'll see this, when you say, I hear what you're saying, you're not absolutely convinced. But if you say, I see that, you know what, I see that, you're more convinced about what you see than about what you hear. Mm-hmm. So whenever we use the term seeing, when it comes to understanding, we mean you understand it to the point that you're sure, as if you see it. Whereas when you hear something, it's not clear. It says when Mashiach comes, we will see God. What does that mean? You can't see God. God doesn't have an image. But we will understand it as clear as seeing it. It'll be absolutely clear in our mind as if we're seeing it. You're not going to actually see God. But you're going to, just like you see 2 + 2 as being 4, yeah, even if you're not seeing it, you're believing it. But we do use the terminology seeing, and that's why you can have a teacher that teaches something. It says you learn much more when you see the teacher's face, because you can learn a lot about what the teacher is teaching, even from the expression, from the facial expressions, and if I show you a diagram of something, I can teach you something that would have taken me an hour to teach you without the diagram. I could teach you in a minute with a diagram, yeah? Mm-hmm. So seeing, you could teach a lot more in a lot less time. You could also teach a lot of things that you're not actually consciously teaching. By showing a diagram, you could be showing things that you're not going to actually point out, but that the student in 10 years will realize, wait, that was on the diagram and that's what it means. So really the teacher taught it by putting it on the diagram 10 years earlier. Okay? So what do we want? We want the godly soul. We want the person to see godliness, to see it, not just hearing it. Because if you just hear it and then you see the water bottle, then you're going to see the water bottle. Yeah, if you think about it, you'll realize there's a godly spark in it. We want the reverse to be the truth. We want to see the godly spark. So when we look at ourselves, we want that the godly soul should have a clear view. And as long as it's being overshadowed by the animal soul, that's where all the problems come in. And therefore, the beginning, what does it mean to serve God? It means to try to take away any obstruction, anything that's obstructing the view of the godly soul.
They say seeing is believing.
Right. But it's believing. In other words, it's not believing. There are 2 types of beliefs. There's a belief when you believe something that, You're just not in the mood of understanding. In Hasidus, this is called belief below intellect. And then there's belief above intellect. There are certain things that you can't understand. There are certain mathematical equations that we don't understand how they work, but we know they work. We believe them. We take them because we don't have the tools yet to understand them. So if a mathematician says, I believe this equation, that's a belief you can accept because he is incapable of understanding it. One day we're going to hopefully get the tools to understand that. One day. Yeah. But right now we can't, therefore you can believe it. But if a mathematician says, I believe 2 + 2 is 4, he's not a mathematician. He's just a lazy good for nothing that's not willing to use his brain to figure out how 2 + 2 is 4. So when a 1-year-old child is told 2 + 2 is 4 and they believe you and therefore they'll repeat it, that's belief below knowledge. But then there's belief above knowledge. If someone says, I believe there's a creator, but he doesn't take the time to look at the world and realize, wait, the fact that there's this world out there, I know there's a creator. I don't have to believe it. I know it. I see it. So now when I say I believe in God, what do I mean I believe in God? I know there's a creator. What part of God do I believe in? So the more I understand, the more I realize there is above that I can't understand that I believe. Yeah. So seeing is believing is the belief that's real, that's very real. That's the seeing. That's what you see. But if you believe something that you could understand, then you're not really seeing it. That's like a waste of time almost. A waste of energy. Next week, we're going to get into if you break yourself, who's the real you? Anyhow, it's going to be a fascinating conversation.
Okay.
Free will and being forced to do something. Can you be forced to have free will? That wouldn't be free will, so we'll see. We shall see.
It says Shema